It's good to know you're still with us. We now have Muktar Mohammed. He's an economist and a family affairs on this channel. Muktar, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure, Felicity.
Let's start with just a basic understanding of what the primary drivers of the cost of living crisis in Nigeria that has now spiraled to what we have witnessed in the past week in the form of protests.
Well, I think the primary driver of cost of living in Nigeria has to do with high imports of essential commodities, especially household commodity food items. And this spark is also as a result of our exchange rate that have moved from a low of about 700 to a high about 1,600. So that is basically what has sparked this high cost of living in the country. And knowing that even some of the machinery that we use for manufacturing of some of these items are also imported into this country. So basically what you used to buy for maybe 70 naira is now over 210 naira, over 200% because of this exchange rate volatility, especially if you are importing it. And if you are doing it locally, because of the cost of energy in terms of oil and gas, right? Maybe petrol, PMS, gas, that also have gone up, especially petrol has gone up from a low of about 85 naira when this administration came to a high about 615 in Lagos and 900 in other parts of the nation. So all these are the key drivers of the high cost of living in the country. And also of recent, we have the increase in power tariff for customers in band A that also have driven up the cost of most of all these goods. So basically, when you are looking at what have driven cost of living in Nigeria, you look at high cost, in the exchange rate. Then you look at high cost of production due to high cost of energy, and you also look at oil and gas, especially the high cost of PMS. Also, all these have been the key drivers of the challenges that we are facing in Nigeria.
How has the government economic policy contributed to it all?
Well, I think basically the government is responsible for what we are experiencing now, especially when the president came in, he removed subsidy without adding other remedies to the challenge. He also floated the currency. Those two very, very important policy decisions have driven Nigeria to where it is. And in as much as I say those decisions are necessary, at the time he came in, maybe implementation has been too much in a rush without putting on some other fundamentals. And the fact that these have come in with a lot of costs, we expect the government to be doing some costs in governance, and also cost of energy should have been a little bit lower than what we've seen now. But there we saw the government raise cost of energy for band A customers also by approximately 200 and something percent. So all these have really not helped in stabilizing the economy. But the two major decisions that have driven the economy to its knee is the removal of fuel subsidy and the floating of the naira. The removal of subsidy, like I said, was necessary, but maybe we should have done it in phases. And the floating of the naira, if you say willing buyers, willing seller, we would have done that. But again, we should have done it when we have liquidity to be able to make sure that the CBN is able to intervene when it's supposed to intervene. So those two very key decisions have really driven the national economy to its knees.
Okay, there's those who actually argue that the removal of subsidy is not the sole driver. I'd like a thought on that, because we know that the Nigerian government has continued to try different approaches to try and solve the problem of rising inflation and the purchasing power that is impacting the purchasing power of citizens. They say that the strategies that they have employed in some parts of the world had worked, but seems to fail in Nigeria. So what's your thinking? This submission was actually given on a piece on the Conversation Africa by Stephen Onyewu. So what's your thought about that?
No, Felicity, I keep saying that we do the copy and paste method because we are not looking at what is causing our own economic challenges. Our own economic challenges is not caused due to supply disruption. It's not the major cost of it, even if it is there. Our economic challenges are not caused because of there's so much liquidity in the system. You and I know that there's not so much liquidity in the system, and we have a vibrant informal sector that is driven by liquidity. So by the time you cut short liquidity into the space, then you are actually killing that sector. Then you look at Nigeria, most economic activities is driven around the informal sector, the SMEs. And so when you hike rate, the cost of funding goes up, and then you are killing some of these businesses, young, vibrant businesses that have to provide power for themselves and other necessary tools that should have been provided by the government. Now, Nigerian economy is a petrol-driven economy, whether government revenue is petrol-driven, economic activities are driven largely by cars that are powered by PMS, not cars that are actually powered by gas, even if the government is trying to do that now. So when people say, oh, what we saw worked in America did not work in Nigeria, what we saw work in UK did not work in Nigeria, because the precarity of Nigeria is different. While UK inflation will be driven by supply chain, Nigerian inflation is driven by four major issues that are troubling the economy, and they are all happening almost at the same time. You have the FX volatility, that is the exchange rate volatility, which is one of the monster. You have the micro-induced inflation, which has to do with central bank monetary policy, hiking interest rate. Like I said, has killed the almost killing small business because of cost of borrowing has gone up. You have the cost of production driven exchange rate because manufacturing companies now will have to pay more for power, so they have to increase that cost and pass it on to the consumer. Then you have the demand and supply side, where a lot of most of the household items Nigerians need to feed themselves. The demand is high, but the production is low, especially local production. So when you have those four variables, they are different from other variables that you normally get outside the shore of this country when they are dealing with inflation. So that's why we said our own inflationary pressure is different from what you get in other parts of the country. But when you look at all what has really happened, you realize that 70% of what we are facing now was as a result of the removal of fuel subsidy. Because, like I said, our economy is over and around petrol. Market women goes to the we don't have alternative source of other means of transportations. Even if they are there, their impact is less than 5% compared to the petrol.
Okay, I have questions about, painting us a picture on how the crisis is affecting the vulnerable. But I think there are more issues that we should be looking at, maybe analyzing the policies that have so far been put forward. We know that the government has made an effort, declared a state of emergency on food insecurity. I mean, we already know about 25 million people are facing a hunger. There is doubt, however, about the efficacy of this approach. I mean, we know that importation of the cost, was that duty cost to bring in food? You talked about that earlier, the rate of our importation. Is that they are arguing that the food inflation requires a bolder and maybe a better articulated strategy if we are to make any transformation. What should be the strategy if you are to advise? Because it does not seem to be working. I mean, that is if you agree with the submission with the state of emergency on food.
Well, one thing that you have to realize is that any economy in the world, any government in the world, the first thing you have to give to your people is food and security. And when you talk of security, also you talk about food security, which is key to economic survival of any nation. Now, you've said something about the importation removal of tariff, which the government have said they're trying to implement. Some of their policy have not hit the ground running yet. We talk like we just talked about tariff suspension, and if you listen to the Controller General today, say they are still working on the modality of that with the Ministry of Finance. So you have policy statements that are supposed to be implemented immediately. And yet we are taking so much time because we have not dotted the line before we make such announcements. So that me is a main problem in Nigeria. Then we also have to deal with those people that already have some of these goods already in and they not have patronage because the earning ability of the average Nigerian is low. So what I expect government to be doing now, fine, in especially with petrol. We have a Dangote refinery which the government have also said can buy crude with naira. But as it stands today, we've heard the report is anything to go by. The government have not even engaged them almost 2 weeks after the president gave that directive. That shows that there's a lot of bureaucracy. We expect an executive order to come in regards to that. That alone would drive down the cost of BMS, and then that will also, like I said, our economy is petrol driven. That could also reduce the cost of production, reduce the cost of movement to the market, and that will bring down costs of goods and services. That is one. Secondly, the tariff issue. I don't know why we have to wait this long to be able to say this is what we want, and then what are household items that will not enjoy the benefits of these free duties? Are we going to continue to have the import-export wheeling buyer type of exchange on them, which I think is not good? I think if you say your naira is undervalued, then fix the right value of your naira, especially with products that will be important to your citizens. So I expect government to put a fixed rate when it comes to importation of some goods, even if despite the food item, then other goods that are also very necessary. I expect the government to begin to think of removing tariff on machineries that are used for production of this, for machinery that are used for food production. So, I expect the government to have also put a fixed rate, like I said, in importation of some of those goods that do not will not enjoy those benefits that they have said. You look at a vibrant sector like the car automobiles sector in the Nigerian economy. That sector is gradually dying because of the fluctuation of exchange rate. And if you say your naira is undervalued, for me, I think most of your citizens should not be buying above your intrinsic value of the naira. And how can you help stabilize that? And is to inject a lot of liquidity into the system. What is the essence of having $37 billion in your FX reserve, and yet your estate range is about 1,600? They need to fix that. And for me, and then like the short-term measures. The president did say that in his broadcast that they are thinking of hectares of land supporting farmers. That also is a good measure, but that could take up to 3 to 4 months before it has seen the light of the day. So the short term, then bring in some of these goods. If possible, the president really needs to think about opening up the border. It's something people have been saying. I think it's high time because of the high cost of living to get a short time solution to a long time problem. When you do that and you give people breathing space, then you begin to do some implementation. I also hope that the government should have been able to take a bite of their power revenue, or maybe increase their subsidy in the area of power, because power is very, very important for the average Nigeria. So how do you improve that of power? Because the power companies are saying because of the high cost of importation, the exchange rate, willing buyer, willing seller, have hiked this thing to about 1,000. So why not fix their rate also, just like what you are trying to do with Dangote refinery, that it will get FX, it will get crude at a fixed FX rate. Why are you not fixing that rate also if you are to buy a power equipment into Nigeria? That will use it to reduce the cost of power also. That will also help in bringing down inflation. So all these are not rocket science. Some things that they need to sit down. But the bottom line is that it will affect their revenue in the short term, but in the long term, it will grow the economy and also take a lot of people off the poverty level.
Okay, you've made submissions and advised against this copy and paste approach that might not be working. But I want us to simplify it a little for the layman who might not understand the technicalities of cost of crisis living, but just how it impacts. One of the policies, after much agitation, was the recent confirmation of the national minimum wage. Do you think maybe this salary review, though yet to be totally implemented, will improve the purchasing power of the ordinary Nigerian in any way?
Well, if in naira terms, Felicity, then you say yes. But if you want to dollarize it like we have always dollarized our economy, you say I think we are worse off than where we were before the increment in the minimum wage. Because if you look at that, at as when they came, if you look at that minimum wage increment and the exchange rate, you still have $34. And also, as it stands today with the minimum wage, it's still $34 because exchange rate has also gone up. And with this 35, $34, the cost of goods has gone up more than that. So definitely, when you look at that, you say, no, we've not moved anywhere further. But again, in naira terms, that is a huge movement. That's over 100%. That tells you how much our currency have suffered. So what I think the government should do, that's in terms of this, they're doing it. They've increased the minimum wage. In how much I thought they should have done better. But they will tell you why they can't do it is because they want to see how they can fight inflation. And because the more minimum wage, the more liquidity in the system, the more inflation pressures that you get. And so I understand that. But again, the main cause is that government should be able to look at their faces, at their self face, and then begin to take the tough decision that will have an impact on the ordinary Nigerian, not the IMF World Bank induced decisions that would definitely impoverish a lot of Nigerians at this moment. So I totally think the minimum wage is needful, but again, it's not enough. But again, in making it enough, then you have to come up with structural palliative, which could also do in suspension of tax for the civil servants that will increase their salary, suspension of tariff, like we've already said, for importation of household item into Nigeria. Those are measures that they can take in the short term that will really drive the economy forward.
Quickly, Mokhtar, there's been a lot of talk about the adoption of palliatives as a short-term measure. From an economist point of view, how would you justify the use of palliative in the bigger picture?
Well, Felicity, palliatives have not helped any economy go and act anywhere in the world. Palliative is more or less like subsidy. If it's done the wrong way, you don't seem to have the benefit of it. So palliative have not really helped any economy, unless those palliative are structural palliative. What I mean by structural palliative that are devolved corruption. And why we call them structurally palliative, because they are embedded in a policy statement of policy decisions. So when you talk about palliative, I expect that palliative should be like what I said: suspension of tax, maybe a personal income tax for the next short where that is what will affect every Nigerian. It's not going to only be for the public sector, but it's also going to be good for the public and private sector. That means that government revenue will come down in the short term. So it's all about the people. When you are saying you are out for the people, and listen to the president said, anybody that tells you that your government doesn't care is lying. Then if you really care, these are part of the policies that you need to begin to do. So giving palliative, like sending or 50 bag of rice, the civil servant should come and register for 40,000 for a bag of rice. Minimum wage is 70,000. Like you said, some of the civil servants have not even received the wages. Where do you expect them to get 40,000? And even if they get 40,000 to buy the bag of rice, tomatoes, a bowl of tomatoes is about 15,000.
Fair
So if they
enough.
do that means would they just be eating rice every day? So we need to look at palliative in terms of structural palliative,
All
those
right.
that will have effect on the bottom line of every Nigeria.
I'm looking at the time and it has flown, but I have to ask this question because some people are saying it is significant. I want to know your view. Is there a relationship between the cost of living crisis and political tensions in a country, and how significant is that in the scheme of things?
Yes, there is, because again, in an election, you always have two parties, the one that won and the one that lost. And if the cost of living in the country is getting high, the opposition tend to capitalize on it and begin to put more pressure on the government. I think that is what is happening. Yes, there's hunger in the land, you cannot deny that. But again, you know that most of these protests also have political undertones, especially those that have happened in the northern part of this country. So definitely there is a correlation between that, because again, why is there a coordination? Because it's government policy that is driving the high cost of living. And then politicians will always capitalize on that, especially the opposition parties will always capitalize on that to make people see that, oh, this government doesn't really care about you people. So there is a correlation. But again, that correlation happened because the sitting government have not come up with policy that is positive to the life of the people that they are governing. And that is why there's always, politicians are always there to take advantage because of the next election. When this current administration were also opposition, they did the same thing. And it was almost through the same process of removal of fuel subsidy. So yes, there is. And that is why I say that until we come to a point in Nigeria where we no more play politics in our economy, we'll continue to have such challenges. The two things that the United States or larger economy don't play politics with. They don't play politics with their security. They don't play politics with their economy because they know it affects everybody.
Quick lessons. I mean, we talked about copy and paste and the need for caution in doing that, taking better consideration of our own unique dynamics. But are there lessons that can be learned from other countries facing similar challenges like Nigeria?
Yes, we have to learn lessons, and it's even in an African country, Egypt. Egypt also have done a reform where was driven by IMF and World Bank. And what they did was that when IMF came with those reforms, they said, okay, fantastic reform, it can grow our economy. What role are you going to play in this reform? And the IMF said what they want to do, and the Egypt government said, no, the first thing that you need to do is you have to see how you can inject liquidity into our economy in terms of dollars term, so that by the time we devalue our naira, we'll have liquidity to support our naira at the support level. And IMF did that, and they said, okay, in the removal of this subsidy, also it was in petroleum product and other, the raising of tax, they will not be done one off. So what they did was that they'll do 30%, they'll do 20%. In the next four years, they will be gradually pulling out of some of this subsidy that they are paying. That is a lesson, and I think that is one template we need to copy an African economy. And when the World Banks also were coming in there, they said, okay, the key driver of our revenue in this country is tourism. Tourism. So they said how much the World Bank can invest in tourism to attract more tourists so that they can attract more effects. Those are part of the reforms that a country like Egypt did. Argentina also is doing the same thing, making sure that World Bank comes in and intervene. Even so
there are options there are available data from other countries that we can refine and adapt to suit our own unique needs. Muktar, thank you very much for speaking with us.
My pleasure, always.
Engaging and listening to my guest and then considering other submissions ahead of this interview, I agree and I am convinced that the Nigerian government's economic policies, despite their good intentions, worsened the cost of living crisis. It is now time for corrective actions, and that's why we have conversations like this. To move forward, the government must prioritize fiscal discipline. Transparency and accountability in economic management are non-negotiable for success. Investing in human capital development and addressing insecurity are crucial for attracting investment in key sectors like agriculture, as discussed, and manufacturing. Rather than relying on temporary palliatives, government should focus on targeted social interventions to tackle poverty and inequality. Importantly, unbundling the structure of governance or government in Nigeria to grow from the bottom up is crucial. To emphasize, it is unconscionable for those in power to live extravagantly while expecting citizens to endure hardship. The government must lead by example. Anything less is a betrayal of the public trust. Let me wrap up this segment by urging the government to take heed of actionable recommendations across board, fine-tune them, like Muktar has suggested, and work towards a better future for all Nigerians. We'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll be looking at World Breastfeeding Week. Why is it important? Please stay with us.